This episode is sponsored by JDAQA Software Testing, your scalable solution for manual, automated, security, and performance testing. Check us out at jdaqa.com. And with that, let's get on with the show.
This is The First Customer, hosted by Jay Agner.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the First Customer Podcast. My name is Jay Agner. Today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Jamon Holmgren. I almost had it on the first take. How are you, buddy? Good to see you.
Doing well. Yeah, good to see you as well.
All right. So you're co-founder, CTO of Infinite Red, React Native shop. You guys build web and mobile apps, I'm guessing?
Yeah, well, we do mostly mobile, but anywhere that React Native is, we're going to do it. And there is some React Native web stuff that we're doing. So yeah, we do some web. We do all kinds of things, including like TV apps and whatnot. But it has to say React Native. If it doesn't say React Native, we're not interested.
You're out. All right. We spent a ton of time catching up before the show. I think we have a lot of similar interests and things going on. But let's jump into, and by the way, if no one has seen it, I will link your website, jamon.dev, in the show notes. It is a fantastic overview. You may not even need to meet Jamon. Just go to his website and then you'll just know whether or not you want to meet him or not, which you will after reading his website. I read it and got a ton of cool information from there. So I'm not going to belabor some of the stuff that we normally talk about. I want to get into some other fun stuff about starting a business, owning a business, growing a business, that sort of stuff. But give me a snapshot. Where'd you come from? And did that have an impact on you being an entrepreneur later in life?
Yeah, I for sure think so. I grew up in a small town in coastal Oregon, surrounded by trees up in the hills and just very rurally. My dad owned an excavation company, a little tiny excavation company. He was always kind of an entrepreneur. Later in life, he became a pastor, and now he's retired, but like a full-time pastor. But before that, he always ran businesses. And so I was around it all the time. Like the idea of owning your own business was just sort of baked into my childhood. And I saw my dad doing it and, some of his successes and failures and whatnot. I'm the second of 9 kids, and we're all pretty close and whatnot. I ended up hiring some of my brothers over the years for various things as I was starting them. So it was definitely something that had an impact on me as I got further into life. And I always wanted to own my own business. I knew that from a fairly early age.
I see you have a few kids as well. Do you think that they're going to pick some of that up from you just from watching you do it?
That's a good question. I don't know. The oldest is 18 and he's just starting his coding career. He's on his second job. He's just working for like a local company as an in-house programmer, which is kind of cool, doing some PHP and Laravel and whatnot. And I think he has the capability to run his own business if he ever wants to, but he's still, he's 18. And the 3 girls I have are 15, 12, and 10. And, they have varying interests right now, but nothing too solid. But yeah, maybe someday.
Maybe someday. I think we may have a similar split. I have an 18-year-old who's into programming as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting you say that because my daughter, they do listen. They hear the stuff that you're saying to your employees and to your friends and to your everyone. My kids will say stuff to me about things they overheard that I didn't, they're watching TV, not paying attention, right? But then they hear every single thing of what you said. What were you talking to that guy about? I'm like, I didn't know you were listening, but they're certainly listening. So all the good things that you're doing, I'm sure are rubbing off on them. So tell me about the first business you started. What was the first one? I thought it was, I saw you did a lot of programming earlier in life. I think I did too. Again, I think we have a lot of mirroring. I grew up in the middle of nowhere. I did a lot of programming when I was in my, young 8 to 10 to 12. Mm-hmm. And then later on you started a business. What was your first business you started?
I think I didn't even realize it was a business at the time, but I started, it was coding, and there was a friend of my dad's who owned his own like construction company, and they needed some custom setup for like a Microsoft Access database. So I looked at it, and my background, like when I was a kid, I was like doing QBasic. So I looked at it and it was Visual Basic, and I'm like, okay, Visual Basic for applications, VBA. I'm like, I could probably figure this out. Yeah, I'll do that. And I'll charge you, $12 an hour or something, which to me was a lot of money, as I was like 18 years old. And I went and figured it out and actually like finished the project, and they started using it, and he paid me for it. So It wasn't an official business. I think it was all kind of under the table, just give me some cash, but later I started my business after I was working for a home builder, and I started my real business, which was it went through a few different iterations for sure. Like there's definitely a stage where it was sort of on the side, and then I brought it in and made it my full-time thing later.
Tell me about the time while it was at the side. Like, what were you doing? How did you kind of manage doing that and supporting yourself and maybe a family at the same time?
Yeah, so when I was working for the home builder, I was doing some pretty interesting stuff. It was like home design and laying out like lots, where's the house going to sit on the lot, and drawing those things. And it was fun, but my heart was in programming. I really enjoyed programming. And so I started a side business that I thought, well, maybe I can make a few websites here and there. And the first one I made was for my church, and they paid me by buying Dreamweaver for me. Like it was like a $400 piece of
Oh yeah.
software back then.
Yeah. It was the bee's knees back in the day, buddy.
It was.
You
Yeah.
were rocking if you had an official license copy of Dreamweaver, which I'm
Yeah.
sure some of the listeners may not have had an official license copy, but you got one.
I did, yeah, because figured, well, for my church website, maybe I shouldn't steal the license, So they paid for it, and I built the website, the first one that they had. And then because I built that for the church, my dad was a pastor there at that time. He knew a lot of people at the church, and there were a lot of entrepreneurs in the church. And because they saw the website that I built for the church, they started reaching out to me and saying, well, if you could do that, can you do that for my business? I need a website. So I was building websites for like excavation companies and whatnot. But when I went on my own, it wasn't actually to do websites. It was actually to do more home design. So in 2005, my uncle, who had his own business, like drawing plans, he still does to this day. He told me, hey, I've got too much work. Can you start your own business, and I'll send you all of my overflow work, and like you can do home design. I'll teach you how to do all of it, because it was different software and whatnot. And so it ended up being a really fun thing that I did until the housing crisis, which was in 2008. So I had a few years of doing home design, remodel design, 3D renderings, all that. And I did a little bit of website stuff all along throughout, but it was sort of a dual business. I remember at one point I even had a website that had a button on one side that said, if you want home design, go this way. If you want web development, go this way, which was a weird thing to do, but that's just what I did.
I mean, it's not that weird considering some of the like design decisions that you had to make, back in the day when just things were like the Wild West still. I mean, even back then when it was like kind of, I would say it was like it was in like middle school, the internet, like the 2005, 2008 era was like still very not what it is today.
Wild West, absolutely.
The Wild West, yes, absolutely. Well, my favorite time I think was like the GeoCities, Angel Fire era of website building and stuff like that.
MySpace, things like that. Yeah.
What a time, just that gives you goosebumps, man, thinking about just the wild. I tried to find some of those GeoCity sites, but I don't think I think somebody was like archiving them or doing something with them at some point. They could maybe find them. I don't know if I'd want to find some of them.
My first official website was in probably 2001, I want to say.
Okay.
And I made a website to document a hiking trip that I went on with my girlfriend and who's now my wife of almost 20 years, and my buddy and things like that. So we had taken a bunch of pictures, and I put them on a web page, and I put a animated lava background because the place we went was Lava Canyon.
Of course you did. Yeah.
And of course I did, yeah. So animated lava in the background, just pulsating.
Easy on the eyes.
Right.
Very easy. I'm sure it was very, contrast is very great. That and like the twinkling star background.
Yeah. The construction guy for the pages you hadn't gotten to.
Whoever made that did not, cash in on, he's probably, you could own an island, like whoever made that. Yeah, I think my first one was I made a website for my middle school, like science project. And it was like, I think like 5th or 6th grade, and everybody was like making posters. And I was like, hey, can I make a website for this? And my teacher's like, I don't even know what that is. Like, what are you talking about? And like, it was on nuclear power, and it was on GeoCities, and had like all the stupid backgrounds and the animated spinning stuff. And it was just like, and blew her away. She's like, this is incredible. Like, this is, 110. You get the
Yeah.
great business, it's the greatest thing I've ever seen. But it's come a long way since then. So tell me the evolution. I mean, so you kind of
Yeah.
faded out in 2008 from the home stuff with
Yeah.
just the natural ecosystem crumbling around
Yeah.
America. Where did you go kind of from there?
It was a tough time because I was providing for my family up until then, solo income. My wife was having babies and we had 2 babies at the time, and it was it was tough. Like, it just dried up. It felt like all at once because design was the first thing to get hit, like that's the first part of the process. So we didn't have anything. Nobody was starting anything. And a lot of construction companies around still had you know, like stuff in front of them in their schedule. So I sat around kind of sorry for myself for a few days. And then I was like, well, it's not up to my uncle. This is my business. I need to go out and do something. So I literally printed up some business cards. I think I even traded work with a print company to get the business cards, like how expensive are business cards, but I
Right.
was just trying to do everything on a budget. And I just went around from office park to office park, like going to offices and, scared as could be, but going up to these places and being like, hey, I do websites. I'm looking for some more clients, let me know. And I got a couple of small things from that. I had some other stuff. I managed to eke it out, but then in 2008, 2009, I ended up getting a pretty big project for a cabinet manufacturer, and they were wanting to streamline their processes because they weren't going out of business, but they needed to get more efficient during the housing crisis. So they decided to invest in some in-house software, and that really kind of helped me start shifting from websites to web apps. And that was a big transition for me. Like, okay, I can do this, I can do MySQL, I can do JavaScript. I even built my own framework to like a PHP framework to work within, which we used for many years. It was very good. And I worked on a few different bigger projects like that, and eventually had to start hiring people because I had too much to do myself.
How well did that experience of walking around terrified, handing people business cards, serve you as a business owner over the following years?
It was huge. Yeah. It really taught me that getting out of my comfort zone, which is just every step along the way, you're getting out of your comfort zone. You're never like just in a groove. If you are, you're probably headed down. So really trying to keep pace and trying to keep moving, I had to do something that really pushed me out of that. And it was huge. It was really big because if you can go into an office park and see these sort of like semi-hostile, people who don't really want to, they're busy, they don't want to deal with you, you're just a salesperson to them, then it really kind of like it bolsters everything else is easy then after that. Like, of course you can talk to someone who wants to talk to you,
Right.
an actual salesperson. And so I've been doing sales ever since. Like, it's just been like, I guess, my thing.
So has that been was that kind of the genesis of Infinite Red, or how did it move along until you kind of got closer to present day?
So my original business was called ClearSight, and I hired some employees in like 2009, 2010. I kept building. And in 2011, I got an iPad and I started messing around with iOS programming. 2012, got some clients actually to pay me to build iPhone apps, iPad apps, and doing web apps still at the same time. And through that community and the Ruby community, because we were doing Rails at that point, I met some other people who eventually ended up being my business partners today. But they were in sort of the same world, and I started getting acclimated to open source. I think my first open source stuff was more 2010, 2011. And then I ended up going to a conference. My first tech conference that I ever went to was a conference that I was the first speaker at. And so again, getting out of my comfort zone.
The comfort zone again. That's
Oh,
comfort zone check.
oh man, yeah. Just I don't even know where my comfort zone is anymore because I've left it long behind. But the talk went well, and I networked really well with a bunch of those people. And there was a company there that was helping with the conference. They weren't putting it on, but they were helping with it, called Infinite Red. And it was a couple of guys, Todd Worth and Ken Miller. And so I really got to know them, and I was chatting with Todd after we left a lot, like on Slack, which had come out recently in 2014, I think. and complaining about some of the challenges I had with my business. And he was complaining about some of the challenges he had with his business. And it turns out that they were different challenges, like put our companies together, and it felt like it fit some holes that we had each in our companies. So we started joking around, well, we should just merge our companies because then it'd make it a lot easier. And then that joke turned into, well, maybe we should actually. That actually sounds like not a bad idea. And so there's a progression through that. And we did a period where we just ran the companies together to see how it would look, sort of a dating period, and it worked out really well. And we started Infinite Red Incorporated. The previous one was Infinite Red LLC. Infinite Red Incorporated was our business together, merging ClearSight and Infinite Red in October of 2015.
Would you go back and start with co-founders again if you had to start the business over, or would you start it solo?
I would start it with co-founders, but it would be with the right ones for sure. The wrong ones are so Todd and Ken and I got along very well, and we still do to this day. But Ken left the company in 2019 because it really wasn't his thing. It just wasn't what he wanted to do. So, because consulting is not for everybody. And so even though we have a fantastic relationship, I know it was tough for Ken, and it's tough, it was tough for us as well to go through that. Now, we did gain a really amazing business partner in Gant Laborde, who came on board. He was our top employee, and he bought into the business and became the third owner just prior to Ken leave. And so there's some pain in that, but I can definitely say that my business partners are fantastic, and I would not be where I am without them for sure. They fill in a lot of gaps in my skill set, things I didn't even know I wasn't good at. I've learned so much from Todd, who's, he's in many ways my mentor. He's about 10 years older. He's run businesses before. So I never had a mentor before. Like my dad, but he was in a very different industry, and it's just a bit different vibe. Plus he had already moved on to being a full-time pastor by the time I started my business. So it was definitely like it was a huge turning point for me to meet those guys and learn from them and figure it out. But we had to work at it really hard. It does not just happen. It took literally, we used to meet 3 times a week for 2-3 hours a day, every single week, just to make sure that we're on the same page. For years, we did that. We still meet every week, 2-3 hours, plus with our leadership team and whatnot. So we're together a lot, but we front loaded a ton of just talking, and it wasn't just about the business. It was about life. It was about all kinds of things, and developing a deep relationship that is very hard to do. And there are many moments that were hard, moments where there's misunderstandings and miscommunications and whatnot that we had to work through. It's sort of like a marriage where, if you never have any conflict, you really don't understand each other very well. So that conflict helped us kind of dig deeper, but it's not easy at the time.
A great story. It's an honest story. I hear the
Yeah.
fluffy version a lot, but I appreciate the kind of real, and I think other people will appreciate hearing kind of a real story to a successful business, because at the end of the day, yes, it was hard, but you guys, you figured it out, and you've kind of made a successful business out of it. So that's a really cool story. What are the main methods that you guys use you mentioned you're kind of the sales guy now. I think you said it kind of grew out of just being some of that initial experience with your business. What do you do today? And how has that kind of changed from back then? I mean, you're walking into our business cards. I'm assuming you don't do that today. Maybe you do. But what are your methods today of trying to acquire, not just guys to keep the lights on, but I think as business owners, we're constantly trying to find that next bigger client that'll really elevate us to the next level. How are you driving sales towards those kind of folks in your business today?
We have a philosophy that is really keyed on a long-term viewpoint, really thinking long-term as much as possible. And so a lot of the things that we did in the beginning were geared toward years from then, which is now. And we would do things like, open source. We would network and develop friendships with other developers. We started a conference. We do a podcast. We do a newsletter. We go speak at other conferences. I'm leaving to go to Poland in this weekend. I'm going to go speak there, and developing those relationships. And it's really centered around authenticity and as we can make it, where it's stuff that we genuinely are excited about, people that we genuinely want to get to know, and just making sure that when people see, obviously we're everywhere that React Native is. Like if you go just like Google anything React Native, you're probably going to find Infinite Red stuff, of some sort there. We're just kind of ubiquitous in the area that we are, and we're specialists and we focus on it. But it's really about being authentic and putting in the work and thinking long term. So it's hard to replicate because, go ahead, start, and in 8 years you'll be here, type of a thing.
Plant the tree for the guy down the road to see,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. And that's very much our approach, which meant that there were some times where we needed short term, like, we need work, right? But we never like overgrew where we were to any major degree. But we've always grown very slowly. We're about 30 people right now. And we don't really intend to get really big. Like a lot of I know there are a lot of other companies out there that maybe started around the same time. We're friends with the owners. We know them well. And we meet with them all the time. And they've gone from, 20 to 30 to 50 to 150 people in that time. And I can just see the stress on their face when I meet with them. And I don't have that. It's just not a thing, at Infinite Red, because we don't grow that big. We don't grow that fast. We're very careful about our culture. We really kind of try to know who we are and just lean into that really heavily. So I can't point to any particular one thing. It's just being sort of ubiquitous and authentic and being in all these different places and putting in the work and then letting time do its thing. And that has worked out well for us over the 8 years that we've been doing this.
The one thing you did say that I don't know that you necessarily gave yourself credit for was just doing React Native, right? I mean, it's hard. It's really hard. It's really hard to say no when you need money or when you're building a company or when you're doing whatever. So, I mean, how has really laser focusing on just React Native that, I mean, quite frankly, has grown and waned and grown and
Yeah.
could, I mean, you've kind of hitched yourself to somebody else's star for better or for worse, right?
Yeah.
So how has that kind of grounded you guys, but also served you well in the sense that, and how also, I guess, is it, are you guys ever worried that is what you're tied to? Because,
Mhm.
if things change, then you guys are going to have to make a foundational shift in what you do.
This is a fantastic question. And I would say that initially, so ClearSight, my company prior to Infinite Red, was more of a wider range. It was, web apps, some websites, a lot of mobile apps, iPad apps. Sometimes we would do some Android, but back in those days, it was less of a thing. And so we were doing all kinds of stuff and mostly trying to center around Ruby and the technologies that we could use there. But Todd and Ken had a company that just did Ruby Motion. Like they were smaller. They were only like 6 or 8 guys at the time. And they just did Ruby Motion. So Todd has always been a big fan of focus. Like he loves being able to just focus on one thing and do it super, super well. So when we met and we ended up merging our companies, we became a little bit more like ClearSight to start with because we were a little bigger and we had all these clients and, that was how we kept everybody busy. Over time, we became more like the original Infinite Red. So we kind of like adjusted. So he had all like really senior level people. And then I had a lot of juniors and intermediates. So those juniors and intermediates got more experienced and eventually became seniors. And we didn't replace them. We didn't replace, and add more juniors and intermediates. We continued to hire just seniors. And in order to kind of have that be the focus, we decided let's continue to specialize. So it was more of an evolution than anything. We eventually finished the progression a few years ago, like 3 years ago or so, where we just do React Native. But your second question there is very important as well. Like what happens if React Native goes down? And it would be difficult, but we have a playbook already because our previous technology already sunk underneath us. So Ruby Motion was the thing that Todd was focused on, which was an iOS version of Ruby based on Mac Ruby that allowed you to like write Ruby and then compile it to regular, like you wrote it in Objective-C. Like you can, You can actually compile it into an app. And we loved that technology. It worked really well for us. There were some negatives about it, but it was for the most part really cool. And then the owner sold it to, I can't even remember who he sold it to. He sold it to somebody who didn't really take care of it, and he went back to work for Apple. So it just kind of sunk at that point. And we saw that and we're like, oh boy, we need to find something else. And luckily at that time we were in the middle of the merger, and we looked around and we saw React Native, and we're like, React Native is pretty cool. Let's do the same. We had the newsletter, the podcast, all those things that I talked about. We were involved in the conference for Ruby Motion, which was a much, much smaller community. We said, let's just run that same playbook over on React Native and do all those same things, podcast, newsletter, conference, everything. It's not easy. That took years to kind of like accrue all those things together, but the playbook works. And so if it were to happen again and nobody wanted to use, React Native anymore, and we were just not getting enough work, we could find another technology, run the playbook again, and shift. We would figure it out.
Love that. All right, let's wrap with one final question, non-business related. What would you do, anything on earth, if you knew you couldn't fail? Bucket list item, something you've wanted to do always, you're scared of dying or failing. What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail?
Wow. I feel a sense of obligation here to say like cure cancer or something like that.
No, I had those answers, but I've also had like
Right.
fly a fighter jet, fly with my actual arms, which is some of my favorite. Just like say that out loud, like it's just, and a couple people have said that, which is crazy. But yeah, anything you've wanted.
I would, and this sounds like one of those, cure world hunger type of things, but this is something that's impacted me personally. Something that would actually make my life a lot easier, a lot better in some ways, even though I've adapted over the years. And that would be to find the best cure possible for mental health conditions. People close to me struggle with that. And it is something that I think is sort of epidemic across the world. And we see it in many different ways, but finding ways to cure depression, anxiety, all these different things in ways that actually does cure it and not just, treat symptoms would be amazing. That would just make the world amazing, and my life would be different in a lot of ways. So I'm going to throw that one out there.
That's a good one. I like that. So you're saying it's not more just medicine that makes people even crazier in different ways.
Right.
Just because of all the weird side effects. Yes. No, I think it's
exactly.
Okay. Well, how can people find you? I know you're speaking in Poland. This probably won't be out by the time you're speaking there, but Infinite Red, you personally, how do they reach out if they want to get in touch?
You can always hit me up on Twitter. I'm at Jamon Holmgren. You can find me at jamon.dev is my website. And you can email me at Infinite Red, jamon@infinite.red.
All right. It's not called Twitter anymore. Are we supposed to call it?
I'm old. It's going to, I started Twitter a long time ago. It's going to be hard for me to change.
Well, it may not even be around that much longer. So
that's true. That is true. If you can't find me on Twitter, it's probably the same handle on one of the other social media platforms.
Blue Sky, what's the one? Blue Sky?
Blue Sky, I'm on there. There's a few others. Blue Sky is actually written in React Native, which is kind of interesting. And then I would also say, actually, my secondary social network is probably LinkedIn these days. So you can always find me there.
All right. Well, I'll put it in the show notes. We'll put in the Twitter/X handle for as long as that's still valid. But you were a breath of fresh air. It's very nice to meet you, brother. I love the journey. Shared some really great stuff. And let's stay in touch, and I'll talk to you again soon. All right.
Likewise. Thanks a lot, Jay. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jamie.